Hello, everybody, and welcome to HYPIA Research Seminars. I'm filling in for Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez. I'm Dr. Usman Chohan, President HYPIA. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. And today, and Matthias is co-moderating with me and assisting me. Today, we'll have a delightful presentation on the origin of languages from our dear HYPIA Research member, Fabian Alonso. So 10 to 15 minutes with your slides, and then we'll share our viewpoints. And finally, at the end, we'll pick a topic for next seminar. So let's have some fun and learn today.
Okay, how did language begin? In asking about the origins of human language, we first have to make clear what the question is. The question is not how languages gradually developed over time into the languages of the world today. Rather, it is how the human species developed over time so that we became capable of using language. Human language can express thoughts of an unlimited number of topics. It can be used not just to convey information, but to solicit information and to give orders. Unlike any other animal communication system, it contains an expression formulation. Speakers can build an unlimited number of phrases and sentences out of words, plus a small collection of prefixes and suffixes, and the meanings of sentences are built from the meanings of the individual words. What is still more remarkable is that every normal child learns the whole system from hearing others use it. Animal communication systems, in contrast, typically have at most a few dozen distinct calls, and they are used only to communicate immediate issues such as food, danger, threat, or reconciliation. The question then is how the properties of human language got their start. Obviously, it couldn't have been a bunch of cavemen sitting around and deciding to make up a language, since in order to do so, they have had to have a language to start with. Intuitively, one might speculate that hominids, human ancestors, started by grunting or hooting or crying out, and gradually this somehow developed into the sort of language we have today. What are we looking for? The basic difficulty with studying the evolution of language is that the evidence is so sparse. Spoken languages don't leave fossils, and fossil scars only tell us the overall shape and size of hominid brains, not what the brains could do. Some researchers even propose that language began as sign language, then gradually or suddenly switched to the vocal modality, leaving modern gesture as a residue. Some simple explanations about the origin of language. The 5 theories. The bow-wow theory, according to the ancestors, started imitating the natural sounds around them. What's wrong with this theory? Relatively few words are onomatopoeic, vary from one language to another. The ding-dong theory. This theory proposes that speech arose in response to the essential qualities of objects in the environment. The original sounds people made were supposedly in harmony with the world around them. What is wrong with this? There is no persuasive evidence. This proposes that language may have developed from sounds associated with love, play, and especially song. What is wrong with it? The theory still fails to account for the gap between the emotional and the rational aspect of speech expression. The poo-poo theory. The theory holds that speech began with interjections. No language contains very many interjections, and other noises which are used in this way bear little relationship to the vowels and consonants found in phonology. The yo-he-ho theory. According to the theory, language evolved from the grunts, groans, and snorts evoked by heavy physical labor. So, but do you get to understand what I said before? Was I clear? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I continue. I go on with the next. Now we have some not so simple explanations about the language of the origin of language. And we are talking here about the interdisciplinary field of investigation. What is in this interdisciplinarity? Several disciplines contribute to the discussion of the origin of language. Computer simulation, cognitive psychology, genetics, paleoanthropology, and comparative studies are some examples. Among traditional disciplines, comparative studies on non-human species continue to play a major role, specifically comparisons with other primates, as well as other species that are phylogenetically distant from Homo sapiens, such as birds. Moreover, there is a widespread conflict with extinct species of hominins, especially Homo neanderthalensis, but also with more ancient forefathers such as Homo ergaster or erectus. Biolinguistics. It is a multidisciplinary enterprise that assumes UG, that's universal grammar, as a reference model. Referring to UG, biolinguistics has a clear theoretic advantage over other different interpretative perspectives, a refined and well-established conception of language. Biolinguistics challenges the view of human language acquisition as a behavior based on stimulus-response interactions and associations. Chomsky proposed a language acquisition device, LAD, as a hypothetical tool for language acquisition that only humans are born with. This uniqueness represents both the strengths and weakness of such paradigm. What is true for humans must also be true for other animals. The problem arises when the reference to uniqueness is used in support of the idea that it's not possible to seek the precursors of language in hominids and species different from Homo sapiens because of a qualitative difference. There are two possible answers. The first is that FLB, that stands for Faculty of Language in the broad sense, includes some traits shared with other species. The second possibility is showing that language emerged outside Homo sapiens. In such a framework, the Harvard's debate is focused on the linguistic abilities of Homo neanderthalensis. Denisovan and Neanderthal share a common genetic line that can be considered the basis of language. The second consideration is that those traits that are unique to humans and unique within humans, to language itself, the syntactic component, is a distinctive trait of language when comparing it to animal communication. Should syntax be considered a distinctive trait that in the early stages of language ensure the transit from the animal communication to the human communication? Pinker and Bloom propose that language is a complex biological structure, so the origin of language must be explained by the theory of natural selection. Apparently, sometime before 80,000 years ago, individuals in a small group of hominids in East Africa underwent a minor biological change that provided the operation merge. That's two syntactic objects that are combined to form a new syntactic unit. Considering the mind as a device that manipulates symbols, symbolic theories of meaning have assumed that the linguistic meaning arises from the syntactic combination of mental symbols. At some later stage, the internal language of thought was connected to the sensorimotor system. Since language relies on syntax, and since syntax depends on merge, the evolutionary steps that have led to language should include not only an explanation of how merge appear, but also a description of how the necessary tools, in other words, concepts, that provided Operation Merge have arisen. From this perspective, cognition is grounded, context-dependent, situated, anchored to experience. The organism's environment has a central role in its behavior. It has been shown that perceptual brain regions that process object-related information are activated by words related to visual features, odors, and sounds, and the same happens with emotions. And as for action, it is known that some areas in the motor and premotor cortex, which are active when subjects move specific body parts, for example, face, leg, arm, are also active when they understand action-related words that refer to those body parts in motion sentences. There are at least 3 levels of involvement of the notion of action in explanations of language, origin, and evolution. The first is constituted by the well-represented strand of gestural theories of language evolution. The second idea of a strong connection between language and action is the starting assumption of some models of language evolution, which assume that the mechanisms originally evolved for action control might have been exploited for language at both the grammatical and semantic level. Finally, the notion of action connects theories of language origin and evolution to the so-called motor account of social cognition. Okay, this approach assumes that the ability to read other people's communicative intentions crucially involves the capacity to understand their actions. As Broca's area in humans developed from a region originally involved in the processing of action, one could assume that the ability to recognize and perform manual actions provided the basis for developing the ability to perform and recognize communicative hand gestures that thereafter contributed to the development of brain mechanisms that support spoken language. Contrary to vocalizations, which are mostly instinctive expressions of emotions, non-human primates, especially apes, make manual gestures. In other words, visible movements of hands produced without using or touching objects that can be voluntarily performed by the animal and used in a more flexible way than vocal signals. Ape gestures and human language share a very important property, intentionality. Both the organization of body movement and speech contribute to the process of communication. Thus, gestures are a natural byproduct of the cognitive processes that underlie speaking. It is not possible to consider the two separately because both are expressions of the same simulation. It has been proposed that an association between the manual system and the vocal system is present from birth and paves the way for embodied language processing later in life. Okay, and the questions of the day. According to your opinion and experience, what is a language? Can it be entirely understood without body gestures, or is there anything lost without them? And the second, do you think there's a language organ, language acquisition device in our brain? Those are the two questions proposed for starting the debate.
Okay, thank you very much, Fabian, for that detailed presentation and for picking very interesting readings regarding this. I'm fascinated by this question. If I could sum up what you have said, it is that there are many different speculations, as Ferretti in their writing said, AL said, we cannot turn back the clock, so we will never really know. And so all we can do is deduce, and from that we have to do our best. And now we have interdisciplinary approaches to do that, ranging from genetics and cognitive sciences all the way to your hardcore linguistics. So with that, I open the floor. Please raise your hand if you would like to speak. We'll start with Matthias. Please go ahead. You're on mute, Matthias. Matthias, you're on mute.
So if you want, Fabian, you can unshare your screen if you want. Well, language, first of all, is a vehicle of communication that transmits symbolic information that is interpreted by different codes established by convention. Thus, languages are different ways to create, concrete, abstract, and transmit ideas. Well, in terms of the organicity of a language, let me say you something. From a biological point of view, both animals and primates or humans, every animal species that can transmit sounds have sort of kind of there's a rudimentary language for making the most basic actions. For example, when two birds attract each other and when they couple each other, or even though when the most basic needs of every species. Well, the relation of neurological, I mean brain and language, I mean at biological or neurological level, in terms of language, every species who have the ability to make sounds, well, they can structure into a language. Well, about humans, or about those who can transform a system of sounds into logics related to a language. Remember that every language, in order to establish a basic communication, I mean, the most basic things in order to establish a communication are three things. First of all, is the ability of the human beings to make orders or commands. I mean, the imperative mode. The imperative mode, since the origins of humankind, since the origins of humanity, we are entitled to make sounds, and the first sound related to an intentionality is precisely the imperative mood, the give to do orders or commands to satisfy a specific need that exists from the cavern age. The second point is that the language, one of the basic things about structuring a language is to describe a series of events in a timeline, regardless of tense aspect mood. That's what I call the real mode. And the third and last thing is about the ability to assign actions to nouns. I mean, the ability to verbalize nouns. Those three things, the imperative mode, the real mode, and the verbal nominalization, are the three most basic things to structure a given language in terms of human speech. Well, in my opinion, there are cognitive relation between our intentionality and the sounds we emit in order to establish communication through speech. Well,
okay. My question will be quite short. From my limited knowledge of chimpanzees, I understand that it is possible to teach them sign language. I remember that Fabian said at the start of his presentation that it's possible that the first languages might have been sign languages. And I was wondering, do you know anything about that, or could you comment on how maybe chimpanzee sign language differs from human sign language or human language in general?
Yeah, excellent point. Using primatology as the lens. Fabian, have you come across anything in that regard? Chimpanzee language?
Not come across about chimpanzee language, but in the article said that the main difference is in syntactic. You join the different sounds to make phrases, right? That's when I talked about the merge operation, right? You take different parts of the speech to make a bigger sentence with a meaning which must be related to the meaning of the words used. I think that's the main difference between chimpanzees and any other animals with humans, the syntactic aspect of language.
Thank you, Fabian. That's a good point. Timothy's question is also very relevant because in the animal world, we do find lots of different modes of communication that are in some ways extremely complex. Coco the gorilla learned a very large number of words. That's not a chimpanzee, but it's an advanced ape. And so it could do it, human communication. Then if you look at something much more rudimentary and much older, bees, they have an olfactory language, right? So that they use pheromones to do it, and it's quite complex. Where they're like, "Let's build this. Hey guys, come here. Whoa, watch out for that." That's quite remarkable. And this is one. Before I pass to Anya, John McWhorter made a really good comment of this when he introduced his course on languages. He says, dogs have a language too, but in their language, you won't have something like, "My parents were honest but poor." A dog is not able to communicate that. Now, what does poor mean for a dog? Well, probably didn't eat. And honest means he really did want to do what he wanted, but they can't articulate that. And actually, I didn't come across this in the reading so much about, or with enough emphasis, but the gossip theory is fascinating to me, which says that we probably came up with this stuff because we had to convey meaning, which is what Matthias was trying to do in terms of imperative, but also just the second part was describing events. And there you have the idea that, hey, I saw your husband with that woman over there at that time. That requires recounting of events in a complex way. And that's a very, very big deal. Oh, you saw my husband there? Well, I'll see about that. And it's very important. So gossip also had this very likely that maybe that was the way it happened. Anya, please go ahead.
Yes, I also wanted to, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Just checking because I'm connected to my cell phone. So yes, I wanted to also talk about the gorilla. I think there was also named chimpanzee or something in 1970s that was taught sign language, but also the Coco the gorilla that you mentioned. And if I'm not mistaken, she, in the period of 10 years, she was taught more than 1,100 words, while her male other participant, the gorilla as well, he only knew or understood 600 sign languages, sign characters. I don't know how to name them. But on the other hand, these people that were taking care of them, of those two gorillas, they were using more than 2,000 English words while they were using the sign language gestures. So maybe, I mean, it was the American Sign Language, but anyway, if I'm not mistaken, there is one theory that you only need 500 words in English and you can already speak English. So this gorilla, if she was able to understand more than 2,000 words in English and managed to gesture more than 1,100, she was very intellectual, and the complexity of the words were very like at the beginning, of course, just to eat, to express those maybe nouns, maybe adjectives, maybe I don't know, basic words. But then through the years, the complexity became very, very huge, and the words that and the knowledge that those gorillas had, I think, in the end, before she died, she left some touching video that make us realize that maybe some other species know more about this world than maybe us, with all this intelligence and all this knowledge of science and languages have. So I don't know, just maybe one intermezzo about the knowledge of the languages with that animals can speak. Thank you.
Yeah, a very good point. It's that touching video that made people think, oh, maybe she wasn't just doing copy paste. Maybe there was some deep association of words that she was capable of doing. That's a very good example. Victor, over to you.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, because I went late. I got some problems here. I would like to review quickly some things or some facts about animals and language. Back to bees. Bees are able to do a very, very simple language, which is the dance of bees, while they use a specific behavior to establish the angle and the direction of a field of, say, some plants where they could pollinize. You could say they have gesture language. So birds, we talk about birds, but birds have basically the language of male wants to mate, female wants to go to male. That's not very much, but I have seen something about that, and birds have a very complex sound that they can be slowed, and they have a melody that our ear does not hear, is not able to distinguish in the natural speed. If you slow the records, it gets complex, but it's not language. So back to apes and the primates, I believe those studies were interrupted because of ethical issues, but at first, apes were able to use imperative even before taught languages through body language, because they establish their dominance through sex.
Exactly, the
gesture.
intentionality through the imperative. Or
Through
I
the
want to do
imperative,
this,
that's
the
imperative.
volitionality, exactly.
Yes, and then they were taught in laboratory many words, etc. Their language reached some stuff like chimp wants food, chimp is king of chimp, follow chimp's orders, chimp uses instruments to reach banana. They did have the power to construct sentences even beyond the words they were taught, but it went not very far. And finally, as I remember, they didn't have grammar. That's something. They had very basic grammar. They had no times. They spoke basically in the present. There was not perfective, imperfective actions, stuff like that. They had imperative. They have present. And finally, another language I've heard of, and there has been studies, I don't know why they were interrupted, where that of whales and cetaceans, they have a sound language, which was surprising to some. And it was used, for instance, to mother whale to control baby whale, stuff like that. But I don't know of any higher grammar. What I would really like to point that is, in human language, there are a few languages who have not written resources, but I believe humans are the only animals who are able to use language to write and to communicate complex procedures in different timings, like perfect, imperfect, past, future, and imperative.
Point taken. Different species have different methods of communication. It's true. Ruben, you've had your hand up for a while. Please go ahead. Ruben.
Yeah, hello. I just want to agree with the previous comments, like Victor said or Matthias, and I want to also provide some new contributions from my point of view. From my understanding, when we think about language, is for me understood as any way of communication, including body language, as Victor said, whenever the message sent by the sender is understood by the receiver. And when we discuss about this topic and we think about translators, we don't have to forget about the Scopus theory, which the Scopus theory is the basic theory for translators, which understood that this message sent by the source is understood by the matter or by the target language. And this is also really interesting because any way of language, also like body language, any sign, is a kind of language as long as the receiver understood the message which was proposed to send by the sender. And talking about this, I will also to make reference to another theory which is really important, is the appraisal theory, or theory of the valoration, which says that depending of the feelings of the speaker, the speaker can transmit, can send valuation expressions in the way, for example, you're feeling good, you will transmit with your language positive feelings, your language will be using positive signs, positive phraseological units, and so on. And in the other way around, when you feel you have bad feelings or so on. So this phrasal theory influence the speaker in the language communication. Yeah, that's what's from my side. Thank you.
Excellent points from everybody so far. So in our discussion, we have covered two approaches in the interdisciplinary fashion. One is the animal biology. We've covered that, looked at several animals. And then Matthias, Ruben, Victor, you have touched upon the philosophy of this, so the semiotics. So there's a sender, there's a message, it's interpreted by the symbology, etc. So that comes into philosophy, which is also very interesting. One thing I think we can look more is into the genetics part, which our readings touched upon, which is that there may be some promise in certain genes like FOXP2, FOXP2, which exists in most people, but in some people it doesn't, and it makes it difficult for them to grasp language and control facial and mouth muscles appropriately. The thing is here, if a chimpanzee and I have such close DNA, what is it about my genetics that allows me to do this? Otherwise, could it also do this, which is what was touched upon earlier? And if not, what is it about my genetics that allows me to moderate today's session, for example? So I think that genetics is one where we really need to give promise, but the problem is most of the pioneering work or the big stuff, even in the citations of the readings we see, come from the 90s and early 2000s. It's almost as if either the impetus has died down or they're hitting stumbling blocks, and we're not advancing so much in this. You know, genetics was supposed to be a really hip thing. Like when I was a kid, the Human Genome Project and all that. I don't know what's happened with that stuff. So if anybody has any comments on that or anything else, please raise your hand. I see Victor, please go ahead. You're on mute, Victor.
Okay. Actually, it's 98% of similarity about the basic human DNA and that of apes, generally speaking. So it's really close. But we have to consider that DNA is much more complex than Human Genome Project thought, because there are beyond the DNA molecule, there are histones, there are other molecules that interact, and also it's not entirely known how one gene interacts with the other, which is metagenomics. So it's really difficult to reach a point where you can know what in the genetic of men about this 2% of pairs of bases is the definition between having a higher language and not. But it's akin also to brain complexity, because human brain has much more circuits, it's much more complex than even the higher primates. And I would like also to make some examples of among humans, because for instance, you have brain lesion people. For instance, if you lose Broca's region in brain, you won't be able to speak till you are able to understand. And also there are all kinds of genetic variations like Down syndrome and Patau syndrome, all gene variations which interfere in the intellectual. And also we have viruses and other stuff that interfere with brain development. A person who is microcephalic or megacephalic, etc., they would be the same genetic of us, and he won't be able to consider. Besides, there are also a bunch of genes that are under development, whose investigation is under development, such as, for instance, myopathies. If you have one of a number of genes or sequence of gene sequences that commands muscle development, you will have a complete brain apparatus to speak, understand, and write, but it may not be able to walk. You may not be able to do the speak, to use the muscles to speak, to use the hand to write. So it's really mega complex.
Yes, thank you, Victor. That's a very good summary of the metagenetics and all of these overarching factors that make it hard for us to draw conclusions from it. Point taken. Anya, you had your hand up? Anya seems to not be here anymore. Maybe
she lost connection, I think.
That's unfortunate.
That she fell out.
Unfortunate. Does anybody have any concluding comments? All right.
Well. My only last remark is that the fact that non-humans the fact that non-humans. Oh, Anya is coming. Anya is coming again.
Finish your comment, and then we'll get to her.
Okay. The fact that non-humans can make sounds not necessarily mean that those sounds can be organized into a language properly, an organized set of sounds with semantics and with even though with syntax. The point is that despite that, I think that actions like in the imperative or the intentionality or the volitive, etc., are common in every species that can make a sound system. Now, what we talk when we translating that to humans, I mean, or talking about the human language, or the origins of the human language itself, the origins of the human language itself, I observed through analyzing different language grammars that there are a lot of languages where the imperative, the optative, coortative, and usive mood, and the present subjunctive are the same. For example, Hungarian, Hebrew, Arabic, and so on. The point is that as there are an intimate relation, there are very close relation between the future tense, the volitional, maybe the volitive, the coortative, usive, optative, and imperative mood. For example, do it. Why? Because I want that you do it. And that feature, that characteristic, is present in the human language almost since birth of any language, as is a basic feature of every language has.
Okay, good point. Here's the distinction where we can go back to Fabian's original question, which is that we talked about sound systems, but other species don't necessarily use sound. They may use smell, they may use touch, olfactory. And so the question of what is a language still remains big, and it's difficult for us to encapsulate all the variants of
there's an intimate association between sensorial things, between senses, what we touch, what we smell, what we hear, associated with several sounds, and that sounds that can be have the shape of words, and words can be compounded in phrases. I mean,
correct. Okay, like synesthesia, our fourth seminar covered that. Very true. That's a very good point, Matthias. Anya, do you raise your hand?
Yes, I actually wanted to add something to Victor's commenter about the genome. So maybe, yes, definitely we should differentiate between what is the knowledge, what we know, or what certain animals know, and then ability to express this, because I don't know, maybe they can't pronounce certain words, or they can't move their hands the way that we do, or stuff like that. So the way they communicate or express their thoughts, their beliefs, cannot be the same as we do. So maybe just to ask ourselves, what is actually the knowledge that we have, what is the knowledge that they have, because it might be the same, or they might know more, they just don't know how to express that so that we would be able to understand. Or in case this knowledge is not so advanced about philosophy, or I don't know, special about science, like we research and like we do and talk about, maybe they just don't think that they need philosophy to find a partner, to be in good relationships. So they are just focused on the basic needs, basic I don't know, things that they need to know to live and to survive. I also wanted to maybe go further in the brain. So I don't know which one. I think Usman mentioned that like our brain is very complex. So that yes, not all focus is only on this Broca's and Wernicke area where it's focused on the language. And this can be proven that not just those parts, or maybe just one genome is responsible for the speech, for ability to communicate. Because I don't know if you remember, there were twins, and one of them, she had some problems in those Bronick and Wernicke area, I think, and she was not able to speak anymore. And then through music therapy, where her right part of the brain was supporting the parts of the brain that didn't function in the left hemisphere. So after this music therapy, she was able to speak again. So this is just how our brain is capable, that we can, if something doesn't work, other parts of brain will take care so that it will work. I think it's not so much there is one gene or just one part in the brain that is responsible, but everything in its complexity. So we just are not, I don't know, maybe smart enough to grasp all this knowledge, how everything works. Or maybe we will hopefully somewhere in the future. Thank you.
Very, very good point, Anya. And they speak to what Victor said about bird communication. We simply cannot capture those frequencies, and on the brain trauma that Victor mentioned. So Victor, go ahead. You have your hand raised in any case.
Okay, just some more instances. If you want to consider chemical language, ants have a language. They do walk with the limbs and they leave formic acid, which means to other ants, come here, there is food. Or they send pheromone, which means come to mate. So it would be some communication. But coming back to man, Sapiens, the book Sapiens, the author Noah Harari, he made a point when he thought and he explained us that language really, truly developed when human groups went beyond about 100 people. And if you go to think of it, even today, nowadays, indigents have a very primitive language. They don't have the same complexity of language of civilized men. They are Homo sapiens. They have intelligence, but even some psychiatrists, psychologists compare the way of thinking to the brain maturity of a child or adolescent, unless they are integrated into civilization. So they have the same brain of us, they have the same potential of us in terms of communication, language, etc. But even though when they live in small communities, they don't go beyond a certain point. It's very interesting to consider too.
Yes, it's a very good point. I'll share a video in our WhatsApp group later of this guy, some Western guy who goes and talks to a Tanzanian tribe who really do, for example, hunt dogs and stuff to eat, like very rudimentary life. And he thought he could get some big insights on life, but really they were very functional and they were really just, he wanted some big meanings out of it, but they really stuck to the ground realities, and it's totally fine. But there was no magic in there no wisdom that he was looking for. So it was kind of disappointed. Fabian, over to you.
Yes, Usman, thank you. Yes, I wanted to agree with what Anya said about the instinctive language of animals. And I also wanted to add to something Matthias said. He talked about volition. One of the differences is that we can say, don't do this, don't do that, because it's dangerous. Animals only have positive imperatives. For example, bring me a banana, go there, go over here, whatever, right? But they don't have the possibility to say, don't follow me because I'm going to the beach. And if you follow me, you're going to die, right? A whale talking to another whale, right? They follow each other and they die on the beach. So they don't have how to say, don't do this, don't do that. And also with Victor said, in the PowerPoint, in the summary of the articles I sent to you, they said that environment had to do with the development of language. I used words that I need to move in the environment I live, right? So maybe here we have words in the area where I live. We have words about cows and horses and the plains and so on. But if I move further in my country, I can talk about mountains, I can talk about the shape of the waves in the sea and whatever, right? So there are different languages, so to speak, according to the environment where you live. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for this insightful and engaging thing. It's part of the culture at HYPIA to develop different aspects of language, and HYPIA Research has come to be a community in its own right, and I'm very proud of the liveliness and the participation of our members. So on that happy note, we will stop the recording and it'll be on YouTube for us to check out later. So thank you very much. to everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you especially to Fabian. Thank you.
Bye.